Hello, guys, students. We are tackling our our first real notes of the course here, and we're going to give you some basic economic definitions, some concepts, and we're going to get into our first major concept, talking about what's referred to as the production possibilities curve, and kind of how we can use some graphs to prove some thought. Okay, so what you want to be doing right now is you want to be following along with these chapter one guided notes. Okay, we're not going to get through all of them today. Um, which, if you're watching this video, you should be able to see this. But the chapter one guided notes, you'll be able to click that. They'll pull up, and you want to fill these out as we go. Probably best to have a hard copy, just as if you can make copies of it, if you can make a hard copy of it. That's probably the best way to come back and study. But if you're a digital person, use the digital stuff and do the best that you can. Okay, so by all means, as we go through along here, I'm going to try to go quickly just to kind of respect our time. I'm not going to try to waste time. So if you got to pause it and write stuff down, um, by all means, do so. So anyway, we're moving on here. Yes, in our previous video, we talked about the definition of econ, and the definition a little bit long-winded. At the end of the day, we're talking about how people make decisions. Okay, and we'll eventually get to societies, we'll eventually get to governments, we'll eventually get to individuals and very specific things with those. We're going to just scratch the surface here today. All right. So I asked this question also, like, what are some things that are scarce? Okay, and scarcity, what you need to realize is scarcity is the concept that once I use something, I can't get it back. So every time I do something, I give something up. If I spend $1 on a bottle of water, that means I can't spend that dollar on a dry erase marker. If I decide to spend 15 minutes watching a Netflix show that I don't like, or even that I do like, I can't spend that 15 minutes doing something else. Okay, so we're always giving something up. We are always constantly making decisions. And some decisions are easier than others, obviously, and some decisions, what college are you going to go to? How much money are you going to pay to go to college? All those things that go into what you're going to try to accomplish, in the next 4 years of your life. And those are more complicated. Those are things that you definitely understand what you're giving up, right? So, you know, we also have to understand that people are going to behave in ways to maximize what is called utility. Utility is just kind of a fancy way of saying satisfaction. Okay, so we're gonna try to make ourselves, you could kind of say, as happy as possible. Okay, so happiness, also understand, is it comes in different forms. So some people are like, hey, listen, I just got to make as much money as possible. Some people want to say, hey, listen, I really want to enjoy what I do, right? And everybody else is somewhere in between, and you make decisions for different reasons, but we're trying to maximize what is referred to as this utility. Okay, and we're going to behave in those ways. Like I said, though, the thing to understand is utility for some people is different than other people. All right. So we're going to try to predict things. Okay. As a scientist, scientists, their job is to make predictions, and we make economic predictions. We're gonna, if we can run the experiment, we formulate that hypothesis. Eventually, we're going to test that hypothesis, and then if we can prove our thoughts, we're either right or wrong. We either got to change what we said, or or we're going to prove it, right? So nothing too tricky in terms of like on a grand scale, on a small scale. It's kind of easy. If I post this on Twitter, it's going to get a lot of likes. That's a hypothesis, right? You're making a choice. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. If I want to talk about something way more serious, say if I lower taxes, what's that going to do for the unemployment rate, right? And so you can look at it as what a government economic standpoint. You can look at it as an individual economic standpoint and how you make choices, right? The tricky thing is, right, it was with econ. So, like, let's just say I'm going to predict that if I go to this college, college A, I'm going to get a job that pays X amount of dollars. Well, you're testing that hypothesis, right? Once you get your answer, you can't really go back in time. So sometimes economics struggles with, you know, recreating an experiment. We can't always do that. So that's the tricky part as we move into what we're talking about. Okay. Um, I'm going to give you these economic principles in a video in the next video. So we're going to skip ahead. So notice on your notes, you're skipping through those economic principles. It should be getting you down to. It should be getting you down to the the bottom of the second page. Okay, so we're at micro versus macro economics now. Okay, so just trying to keep you guys straight. All right. Now, we are in the world of macroeconomics. There is a difference between macro versus micro. I have them listed there for you. Macro is going to focus more on probably government policies and how certain government policies are going to affect the demand and how much money people spend for things. You know, it's going to include tax rates. It's going to include interest rates at banks. It's going to include how money changes values in comparison to, say, like the United States dollar and the Mexican peso. It's going to look at that stuff. Okay. Microeconomics is going to focus more on would focus more on like, if I'm a business and I'm making this much profit or losing this much money, am I going to stay open? And those types of decisions. But there is a little bit of a difference. You don't necessarily have to know the exact difference. I mean, you're obviously going to see what we're going to study in macro as we move forward. But there is some overlap. There is some overlap as well. Okay. All right. So what we also need to understand is that our income is limited. Okay. What we want is going to be unlimited. This refers back to that original talk about scarcity that we just mentioned at the beginning, right? We're going to spend our money on necessities first, generally, usually, right? And don't be confused when we say that, I'm satisfied with my life, right? Don't be confused and say, I could use a little bit more, but I'm happy with how things go. Don't be confused with that being like greedy. Okay. So like, even though I have the ability to buy all the stuff that I need, I'm satisfied. Like I could still probably figure out a fancier vacation that I'd want to go to or go on, right? So again, our wants are going to be unlimited. We've got to make decisions on what is best for us though with our limited income and our limited time. Okay, but we usually think about our income being much more limited time. Okay, so every decision we make, okay, is going to have a cost. All right, every decision we make is going to have a benefit. All right, we can refer to these things as marginal cost and marginal benefit. Okay, as you're filling in your notes there. So the tricky thing, or the thing that we've got to understand, is that marginal benefit decreases as we consume more. Okay, and we use the fancy term quantity rises. Okay, so think about it this way. All right, if I were to, let's just say, have a pizza eating contest. All right, so let's just say I hadn't eaten all day. It's dinner time. I'm getting a pizza. Let's just say my favorite pizza around here is a place called Columbo's. So if you know Columbo's, it's hard to eat a whole lot of Columbo's. It's very filling. So if I'm eating Columbo's pizza, the first pizza is extremely beneficial, right? My quantity is very low. Okay, my quantity is very low. My marginal benefit is very, very, very high. Okay, because I've only had one piece. Now, as I get into that pizza, I'm less hungry. I'm less hungry. I'm less hungry. And if I get to my 10th piece of pizza, there's a chance that, you know what, like the benefit actually has become like a hindrance. Like there is no benefit. Not A, it's probably going to put some weight on me, right? And B, like I'm really full. And if I get too full, I might get sick. Okay. So our marginal benefit, okay, is going to decrease as we increase how much we've consumed. We can put this on a graph. All right. And so anytime we have a graph in economics, we're always going to have two axes for the sake of what we're doing. And the y-axis is always going to be related to a price. Okay, and I'm going to call price and also like profit on this one too, and you'll kind of see why as we go forward. All right, and our x-axis here is going to be referred to as quantity. Okay, so as we're moving forward, we just said that our marginal benefit is super high when our quantity is low. Okay, so again, like we said, price, it's going to also include like profit benefit in there. Okay, we should use the word utility in there also. Utility. Okay, so our quantity is real low, our utility is real high. Now, as we consume that pizza, right, we said that the benefit was going to go down. So our quantity is going to increase. It's going to move to the right, and our utility is going to go down. So we get to that 10th piece of pizza down here, and our utility is very, very low. Theoretically, it could be negative. Okay, like we're getting nothing out of it. We're going to label this. This is our marginal benefit. Okay. Now that's only half of our graph. We go back. We also have our marginal cost. All right. So our marginal cost does the opposite. So our cost, and again, we kind of mentioned this with the benefit, right? Our benefit decrease. Well, if we're eating this pizza and we get to that 10th piece, well, our cost is going to be really high, right? Like I'm going to get fat. I might get sick. The cost becomes higher. If I just eat one piece of pizza, there's not much of a cost to that, right? Because again, like I can consume, whatever the FDA says, 2,000 calories a day. There's not 2,000 calories in one piece of pizza. So the cost is very low. But as the quantity, it increases, though, as the quantity rises. Again, we can draw the same exact concept on this graph. Okay, so the price, again, this isn't quite the utility. This is our price. This is what we're paying for. So our quantity is really low. So like one piece of pizza, not super, quote unquote, expensive. Right now, as we get to that 10th piece of pizza, our marginal cost line here, okay, our price goes up, our cost goes up, and obviously the quantity goes up. Now we've got a special point on this graph. We're not going to talk too much about it today, all right? But we have this intersecting point. The fancy term for that point is the equilibrium. And we're going to behave as often as we can at that equilibrium. Okay, we're going to eat this 5 pieces of pizza, whatever that number of pieces of pizza is, right? And so we're going to eat that 5 pieces of pizza as often as we can. Now, do we misappropriate sometimes? Sure, we're not perfect humans, right? But we're going to assume that people are going to behave at that spot as often as possible. Okay, and we're going to use this term equilibrium a whole lot throughout the course of the semester. Okay, but that's where those two lines intersect. Okay, so the next part of this, all right, if we can identify how people are going to behave within this benefit and cost, we can also predict and identify how people are going to behave when they're given a certain resource. Okay, so in this particular case, if you can kind of read through this, right, you're going to have 5 hours of time that you can do whatever you want. Okay, now we're going to make you break it down into 2 options. Okay, so economists like to think they're really smart. They're not as smart as they think. They can only break things down into 2 options. Okay, so I'm asking you to break this down into 2 different options. Okay, and you've only got 5 hours now. Some of us are like, dude, 5 hours. I don't have 5 hours in any given day, but we need 5 hours just so we can prove the point. Okay, so take a second, pause the video, kind of think about those things, and see if you can put this stuff on a graph. All right, so hopefully you pause the video. If you are anything like students I've had in the past, you're going to come up with some graphs that look something like this. So you got 3 hours, 2 hours. If you did something like this, 2 hours, 3 hours, you did a pie chart. Okay, now the challenge with those are that they don't show us every possible option. Okay, so if we wanted to list every possible option, there's a pretty simple way to do it. Now I have some grid paper over here already. I'm going to narrow my 2 things down to, I don't know. I'm going to say I can watch Netflix, and I'm going to say that I can read. Very stupid. Okay, now remember, I've got 5 total hours. Okay, so if I spend every single hour watching Netflix, you know that I'm going to spend I can spend 0 hours reading. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'm going to put a point right there. Again, 0 hours reading. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can do the opposite. I can read for 5 hours and I can watch 0 hours of Netflix. Well, what if I want to spend 4 hours on Netflix? How much time does that leave me to read? 1, right? Obviously 3 and 2, 2 and 3, 1 and 4. Okay, we can connect these dots. Okay, and this is what is referred to as the production possibilities curve. We're going to eventually get to that here in a second. These are every possible option that I can perform those two things. Like we said, we had to simplify it. Okay, we had to only come down to 2. We can't put 3 on this two-dimensional graph, right? But I can now show my 5 possible or my infinite number of options of producing some type of basically consuming my time, right? Okay, so we're going to use this graph. We're going to keep it going as we move forward. All right. So we can also, like I said, we spent our time. Remember, we're usually talking about that as consuming. Okay. So we've got another question here. All right. It's asking you, what is the maximum amount of times that you can go to Hacienda versus Taco Bell at different prices? Okay. So what you want to do, okay, is you want to try to say, okay, I've got $60 a month. All right. Understand that. I've got $60 a month. And what is the maximum I can go to Hacienda versus Taco Bell? And then can we make a chart of all our possible options? Okay. Pause the video, kind of go through that for a sec, and we'll come back here. Okay, so hopefully you got a chance to kind of think about what you could do. Now, here's what you're going to find out. This is actually easier than what you're going to think that it is. All right, it's just since you're learning something new, you're probably a little bit skeptical that it's so easy that this is an AP class, like it should be hard. So, first of all right, is if I want to set up a chart, I can do that. All right, and if you set up a T chart and it looks something like this, again, we get complicated over here, right? We just say, okay, we're just making sure we're spending our $60. All right, and again, we're assuming that we're going to spend every single dollar in on these two places, right? And again, people are more complicated than that, but we can't graph that as common. So we're going to assume that that's what's going to happen. Okay. So if your T chart looks like that, if it looks something like this, hopefully, right, that if you went 4 times, $60, 0, right? So it should look something like that. Now, if we're going to put this on a graph, okay, and if we want to get technical, we can figure out our max consumption of each. That's going to be income divided by cost. You have to excuse my handwriting on here. My screen moves every time I touch it, so just kind of bear with me. All right, so I already went through and I did the math for us. I can go to Hacienda 4 times. We looked at that on our T chart. I can go to Taco Bell 8 times. Okay, now we can put that on a graph. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or Hacienda 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And I'm going to connect these dots as good as I can. So I'm going to try to kind of give myself a little bit of a guide here. My production possibilities curve is going to look something like that. Super obvious, right? Let's go back and check. 6 and 1, 4 and 2, right? 6 and 1, 4 and 2. We're set to go. We're set to go in how much we can consume of each. Now, the next thing we want to figure out is what is our cost of changing restaurants. So let's just say this is back-to-back weeks. So let's say I went to Taco Bell 8 times in 1 week. Not healthy, but that's okay. And the next week we said, you know what? I'm sick of going to Taco Bell. Okay, so let's say week 1, I was behaving right there. Okay, 8 Taco Bell, 0 Hacienda. So let's say the next week said I got sick of Taco Bell. What if I want to go to Hacienda 1 time? All right, let's try this Hacienda place. So the question is what is the cost of changing restaurants? Okay, how much do I have to give up of Taco Bell to go to Hacienda 1 time? All right, now we can look at it and say, okay, well, now I am producing 6 at Taco Bell. We're giving up 2. Our cost is 2. We can do it that way. There's a little bit of an easier way, and I think it's actually a quicker way, especially if you're in a situation where you don't have good graph paper and maybe the numbers aren't as perfect as like 2 to 1, right? So what I like to do is I like to say, okay, my max using all my resources is 8 Taco Bell, and that equals 4 Haciendas. Okay, so I got 8T equals 4H. If I want to figure out to go to Hacienda one time, I got to get 1H right here. Okay, so to get 1H, I say, okay, divide by 4, divide this side by 4, and now I have 1 Hacienda equals 2 Taco Bells. Always put a box around that so I know that that's kind of your final answer. And studying the test too, they're going to know that as well. All right, we can flip it too. Let's say, okay, well, how much Hacienda do I got to give up to go to 1 Taco Bell? Okay, so I'm going to set up my equation again. AT equals 4H. Now let's solve for T this time. Divide by 8, divide by 8. 1 Taco Bell trip cost me a half of a Hacienda trip. Put a box around that. These are always going to be reciprocals. Okay, that's an easy way to figure that out. Yes, we can have fractions. No, can I go to Hacienda half a time? No, not really, right? But again, we can have fractions, and especially in terms when we talk about like what we produce here in a second, we can have half a bushel or a third of a bushel or whatever. Okay, so again, this is what we would consume based on our income. Now we're going to talk about producing stuff in terms of available resources. All right, so one thing we've got to remember is this term ceteris paribus. I don't throw it around too much, but the term refers to the idea that basically the world freezes, time freezes when we're asking these questions. Okay, it eliminates what ifs. So like if we a what if for the previous question, well, what if it was my birthday week and I got extra money that week? Well, we're eliminating that what if. Okay, we're not worried about your birthday week, so we're eliminating that what if. Okay, time is frozen. Says, hey, your income is frozen, the prices are frozen, we're stuck. Okay, so we're eliminating those what ifs. It'll make sense a lot more once we keep going forward. But again, it makes things simpler. It's a good thing. Okay, so here's what we've got to assume for production. Okay. Now, when we talked about Hacienda versus Taco Bell, our production was fixed, right? And since it was fixed, our line was pretty straight. Our money is only worth the same amount as at Taco Bell as it is at um, Hacienda. Okay. Now, in some situations, okay, resources are going to have different values. Okay, so let's see. I've got corn here. I'm going to draw this, and I've got soybeans. All right, I've got 10 units of soybeans. I'm going to count by twos. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Always label your graph. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. Always label your graphs. They don't have to be perfect, but labeling them is what they're going to be looking for. Okay, so I can draw that. Now, we're going to assume that when we produce stuff, we're going to consume on everything that's produced. Okay. Obviously, we're going to assume that everybody's working in this case. We're going to assume that our resources are fixed. That was like our income example, right? Our technology is fixed and that there's only two goods that we can produce. So basically, we're saying, okay, what's my number one producing product? We'll just use Elkhart as an example. Corn and soybeans seems to be the stuff. If I'm a farmer, that's what I'm going to produce. Okay, so we're always going to narrow it down to two things. That's referred to as the opportunity cost. Okay, now, in some cases, okay, when we can specialize, okay, we might have situations. So let's just say we're going to change this to RVs and we're going to say corn, okay, here in Elkhart, Indiana. Okay, so as you know, different resources can be used for different things. For example, some people are good at farming, some people are good at building RVs, right? Some land is good for farming, and some land is not good for farming. It's suitable to build factories on. Okay, so what that creates is, and again, we can beat our heads against the wall, so to speak, and use every single resource to produce corn. We could. We could do the same thing. We can use every single resource to produce RVs. We could, right? We could have the people that are crappy at that stuff do it. We could have the land that's crappy at doing it. We could try to grow corn in a swamp, whatever. We could do that. We're not going to do that, right? We're going to let people specialize, and we're going to let land specialize And what that creates in an economy is it's going to create this idea of a bowed out production possibilities curve, right? We're going to try to specialize our labor. We're going to let people do what they are good at. All right. The term for this is creating increasing opportunity costs. So what that means is, okay, let's say I'm producing corn at this spot right here. Okay. And if I want to produce a half a unit, so going from here to here, if I want to produce a half a unit of corn, so one half of a unit, I'm giving up 3 RVs, right? That's expensive. Okay, that's expensive. Now, remember, I only went up one half. Okay, now let's just say that I go up from here to here, right? Okay, now I'm gaining one whole unit of corn, right? So I'm going up one. Okay, well, how many RVs do I got to give up? Well, this here is only a half of an RV. Okay, there's only a half that I'm giving up there. And so, what that obviously creates in that particular case is what we refer to as increasing opportunity costs. To produce one unit of corn down here, my cost is a half. To produce one half of a unit of corn up here, I'm giving up 3 RVs. Okay, because again, if I can try to use all those resources that have different abilities, I can try to do that, but it's not going to necessarily be cost efficient, right? Cost effective. All right. Now, the last concept that we're talking about is that we can shift our production possibilities curve. Okay, and that can come in the form of having these things change. So, if we're going to shift our curve here, okay, so let's use RVs again, and let's use corn again. Okay, so if these things change, alrighty, so let's say, for example, our population increases. Okay, so now we got more people. Well, if our population increases, we're going to assume that we're going to change corn to shoes. Okay, because corn's kind of a fixed resource, which is land. We need more land. But if we have more people, we're going to assume that we can produce more stuff. And we're going to take a guess. That's what our new production possibilities curve would look like with a higher population. Okay, same with a higher education, more skill. People are faster, right? We have these set resources, time, land, skills. We have more education, we're faster, we can produce more stuff. And we might also have better technology, okay, that we can produce stuff faster, okay? And that ties into, reaching different resources as well. Now, we may also be able to say that, let's just say that, we have a increase in the ability to produce rubber for shoes only, okay? Rubber for shoes only, all right? Well, does it say anything about RVs? It does not, okay? So if it's shoes only, we can guess that our graph is going to do something like that, okay? Shift outwards in that direction. The same can be said, maybe some of you know that there's fiberglass in RVs. We have more fiberglass available. What's that do for our production possibilities curve in this economy? We're going to guess that it would do something like that. It's going to help the production of RVs, but not shoes, okay? If our population were to decrease, we could also guess that, our curve could do that. We could also say, oh, the cost of leather for shoes increases, it's unavailable, so we could only shift one line as well. Okay, we could decrease one line as well. Okay, if we have, okay, the last thing I am going to mention, I lied to you. I have one more thing to mention. As we look at these graphs, okay, there's certain things that we're going to assume that may happen, and our axes don't really matter here. but we can draw on a graph, okay, certain things that may happen. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to draw is we want to draw as efficient as possible. Okay, so anywhere on this line is going to be that we are behaving efficiently, including down here. We may not be as efficient as we want, but efficiency means that we're going to utilize every resource. So these are efficient points. Okay, anywhere on the line is efficient. Now, we also have some spots, if we can be efficient on the line, we can also be inefficient inside. So why might we be on the inside of the line? Well, if we're experiencing unemployment, if maybe the government doesn't allow us to use some land for farming, which that's not saying that they shouldn't, right? So if they have a national park, well, we're not really producing anything out there. So in theory, the United States is not on this line. In fact, no economy really is, because every economy has some unemployment. Every economy is using something inefficiently. So all these points are inefficient. Anywhere inside the line is going to be inefficient. Okay. And again, that might mean that we are having unemployment. We want to be as close out here as we possibly can. And then the last spot we can be is we can be on the outside, right? And say, hey, we want to produce way out here. This would be referred to as unattainable. Okay, we can't produce out there. We can't. We don't have the resources. Okay, we are talking about this is the maximum. We are maximizing our resources. We're using every piece of land. We're using every piece of labor. We're using every piece of capital that we have. Okay. Yep, that is what I have for you today. A little bit long today. Kind of show me some grace here as I'm kind of figuring out the pacing of the class with the videos and as we go from there. Okay, so I appreciate you paying attention. Hopefully the notes went along pretty well. I mentioned in class to the kids that this is the first time I've taught this virtually. So like I said, show some grace for me. Don't hesitate to ask questions. Hopefully you're popping in during class as well. That might be beneficial for you too. But by all means, if you have questions, holler at me. Some resources for the MyAP stuff are going to be made available as well. So that might be that will be a good supplement to watch some of their videos also. All right. Have a great day. We'll talk soon, and keep hanging in there.